Hello and welcome to another episode of Mortgage Video Mastermind, where we bring you professionals who share insight into the latest trends, tips, industry, technology, and services to help you create more videos to use in your mortgage business. So we are live and streaming, and we want to welcome you to another episode of Mortgage Video Mastermind. My name is Ginger Bell. We have Scott Schang here, and we have a special guest that I am super excited to have on today. Mr. Todd Bookspan, who has his business Win by Noon. And I always geek out when I, get a chance to talk to you because I'm very much about scheduling and planning and things like that. So you guys are in for a treat today. So thanks for joining us, Todd.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I am obviously a big fan of you two. And anytime I get the opportunity to record anything with you, I see all those awards sitting behind you over your left shoulder. And, I was blessed to be part of that podcast. And so I'm excited to be back. It's been too long. Excited to be here.
Yeah. Yes. Todd did, when we went straight into COVID, I said, you know what, we've been through this before and we need to get some positive message out there. And so we did the flatten the curve, not the spirit. And we won 2 tellies for that one. So yes, thank you for participating in that. That was a much needed event. And we're, always have those things that are much needed. And what you do so much as far as helping people organize is always much needed, especially now.
Absolutely. I feel like, everyone has good intentions in our business, and, they've set maybe even set a goal for doing something that they feel is really important to move them forward, especially in a shifting market. And they get to the end of their day and they realize they were just busy reacting to other things that were certainly important, but maybe not as urgent as what they need to do in order to make their business thrive in a time where, I just feel bad. I talk to a lot of loan officers who are really struggling. And then, I talked to a bunch of rock stars, and really the primary difference is, the habits that they have around scheduling.
Yeah. And, so when you think about, we always talk about, content, and, Scott, like myself, is a content developer and, started out doing blogs and now I've switched to video. But the ability to consistently produce content begins with having a plan. And so what are your recommendations as far as creating that plan?
Well, I think it always takes with being crystal clear on what your goal is. There's an author out there who I really like. His name is Stephen Pressfield. He wrote a book called The War of Art. Yep. And he's a very accomplished person, but it was interesting. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend when I was driving back from California, where Rich Roll was introducing him. And he said something that really resonated with me. He said, the amateur has amateur habits, a professional has professional habits, and that's all the difference in the world. And it really kind of got me off on this tangent this week of, really, are you an amateur or are you a pro? Mm-hmm. And my experience is that, someone who's truly a pro has that clear vision, right? Knows what the goal is. And then they're going to take, calendar. It's funny because literally I just got my, we have a full big on calendar that we put in Win by Noon. So this is the 2023. They just came in. I was all excited. I saw that they're here and pulled mine out already. And so I'm already looking even at next year and saying, okay, what are the big rocks that need to be scheduled, first? I'm pretty visual, right? So, here's kind of this is the messed up one from this year, but it's got all sorts of colors and my kids write their birthdays in and all sorts of exciting stuff. But,
just so you won't forget that, right?
Well, yeah, exactly.
And so you live out of that book, so they got to get in there and get their daddy time scheduled.
Exactly. But, it's always what are the most important things, right? So, for me, certainly family always comes first. And so I'm always trying to look ahead, as I'm committing myself to, show up and speak at events or, even the events that we do, to make sure that, I'm not putting that over something else. And so you always, because it's always a decision, like what's really going to be more important for me. But if you haven't actually looked at it, and I'm a very visual person, I find that most people are, I've got all the same dates and all the same commitments in my, this little thing here, that computer I carry in my pocket called an iPhone. However, it's not as visual to me. It's harder to get your arms around it. Even my wife says, oh gosh, I know you've got those things out there, but I don't, I see them on the shared family calendar, but it doesn't resonate with me until I until I actually see something printed out so I can actually look at it. And so what I tend to find is, first is you have to figure out what's most important to you, right? So, again, you've got to do other things as a loan officer. You've got to be calling your leads, and you got to be, calling your pre-qual clients who haven't gotten you their documentation, all those other things that, we all know that we should do that we may or may not get done. But, we know that video is such an important part right now. I mean, if you're not really doing a great job with your social media presence, then that obviously is not either not a priority to you, or you're telling yourself it's a priority and you're not actually scheduling it to get it done. And so really, I always start off with what are my big rocks that I'm committing to, that I'm going to work around, right? So again, you put the family big rocks on there first. And then you got to look at the work big rocks, right? Or is there, do I have a meeting I have to be at every Tuesday at 10 for my corporate meeting, or a branch meeting that we have, or whatever those other things that I'm obligated to be at, that I've said I'll show up at. And then maybe there's some networking events that you should be at, and then those should get on your calendar. And then you look at it and you're like, wow, I've got a lot of blank time. And what I tend to find is people who have blank time find blank things to do, meaning unimportant things to do, things that aren't really the priorities that are going to drive them forward. I recently interviewed a guy named Don Hobbs, and Don has a really, really interesting story. When he was a teenager, he became friends with Jim Rohn, paid to go to one of his small masterminds, sold everything he had to do it. And then he ended up running Orange County sales for Jim Rohn. And then he said a couple months later, this guy that you may have heard of named Tony Robbins came aboard, and Tony Robbins ran LA for Jim Rohn. And then eventually this guy, Don Hobbs, ended up taking over all sales for Jim Rohn. He's got a really impressive resume, but when I interviewed him, said he loved Win by Noon. And the story that it reminded him of is that one of the companies that he helped start was when Gary Keller wrote the book, The One Thing. Gary Keller started a one thing company, and he hired Don to run it. And Don's like, I've never had a job since I was a kid. Gary, what do you expect from me? And Gary said, you know what? I just expect from you to work hard in the morning until noon, because pretty much you're going to be worthless after that anyway. And so of course, me, I geek out because he's talking my language of those priorities. And so the reason I say that, if you got a blank calendar and you're not clear on your priorities and you're not scheduling things, it's probably not going to get done. What I tend to find is that when someone literally just takes the thing and says, okay, this block on my calendar is going to be for calling my leads, or this block on my calendar is for recording video, then I think that's the number one thing that makes a difference. When you've made the commitment to yourself, and it's got to be a commitment, then you're way more likely to get it done. Not 100%, unfortunately, because again, you still may have some loan emergency come up that may do it. But the question is it really a loan emergency? Is that person really sitting in the driveway with the U-Haul there and their loan's not going to fund? Or is it something where you could record video for an hour or a half hour even, and then chase down the pay stub or do whatever it is to make sure that you got that important priority done? And so that's really where I think I would start.
Yeah. Well, and having a start is so important. I wrote my mortgage video planner from the base of, okay, if I give you a topic and a place to write it, and you can fill it out and get your thoughts together, and every week you do that, then will you develop the habits? And it's funny, as we've gotten into this, and honestly, I think we need to collab on an entire book on it, because the part of the content needs to go with the part as far as what you're talking about in the scheduling, and have that commitment, block it out, put it on the time, on your calendar. In the morning is great because you're usually fresh. For us ladies, we've done our makeup on our hair and all that kind of stuff. But being in the right mindset begins with putting it on your schedule and knowing that it's there. It's kind of like going to church on Sunday, hey, it starts at 8:00 and it's in there. And if you're not there, so how can somebody, it's like, put it on the calendar. What are some things that they can do to make that commitment to stick with it? What are some of the best practices for that?
That's a great question. And so real quick, before I answer that, what I love about your video planner is the number one excuse that people have, besides being busy, is that they don't know what to say or what to do. And so the fact that you're giving them the ideas to get that brain going, I think that's the other part. And so, part of that'll be, you have to schedule a little bit of time, what I would call on time, to work on that book, right? You got to work on, okay, Ginger says, here's the topic. And then you've got to actually spend some time ahead, separate from your recording time, to make sure that that you have the topic ready to go when the time comes. And so I would say the other kind of tips and tricks, again, these are going to sound really basic, but, as someone who has, coached some of the top producers in the country, as someone who, used to close over 500 loans a year, and understands the struggles that loan officers go through, a lot hasn't changed. And so it's little simple things like, my phone rang 5 minutes before I got on this call with you. And I have a choice at that time. Do I pick up the phone and answer it, knowing that might be really stressful to try to squeeze in a 5-minute conversation because I had a hard commitment, right? I wasn't not going to be here for you guys. And so when it's not a hard commitment, when the appointment is with yourself to do something, then, you're less likely. I could have been like, oh, well, it's just me recording video. I can start 10 minutes late. So you just have to get rid of that mindset that this is like you're showing up here to be live with Ginger and Scott. And so therefore, as soon as you say that's my time, then you've got to protect that time. So, number one is, the phone rings, then you say, you know what, let it go to voicemail. You can always call that person later.
Right.
And then the other part is again, you got to, if you're in an office or in a house or whatever it is, you've got to let people know. I mean, I told Adam, who's my right-handed wind by name, who's sitting out there, hey, I'm getting on this call, primarily because he's got his dog and his new puppy dog here that are going to bark at any minute if I'm not. But again, you also warn people around you, hey, I'm busy. And so, you get that other buy-in from them. And then one of the things I think that actually would work really well, ironically, I was working out of a buddy's office yesterday, real estate office. He runs a real estate team and he's a real big EXP network guy. And he's got a spare office. So I was crashing there yesterday. And sure enough, this guy that I know who's a videographer shows up. And I couldn't figure out, it's funny, it's a little bit of a ghost town there. The agents, some of them come in and have a commitment. They're every day doing what they're supposed to do. And others just show up at certain times. I couldn't figure out why there's extra people there. And the videographer comes in with this camera over his shoulder and they've hired him to show up. And so that may be one of the people is maybe there's someone else that you can have be your coach or your videographer, because these people all had to be here. And I laugh because one of the guys who's normally there every day when I go to the office apparently had a signing way across town and he wasn't there. And they said, that's just so unlike him not to be there. And so I think you also have to look at that and say, okay, well, if that's truly my time, it's, to me, I think it's this whole idea of it's got to be non-negotiable. And again, so if it's non-negotiable, and let's pretend you don't have a videographer because you can't afford that. Let's pretend it's just you. If you're going to say, okay, this other thing came up and I'm willing to put off my video stuff, you have to move that block somewhere else as a non-negotiable. You have to say, okay, I can't do it at 10 now. I'm going to move it to 11, or I can't do it at 10 today. I'll do it at 10 tomorrow. Because if you just say, oh, I'm not going to get it done, and you don't reschedule it, it's probably, never going to get done. And it sounds really hokey just to alert the people around you. Sounds really hokey to say, hey, maybe get someone who's going to show up and video you. Because guess what? I think if someone's going to show up and video, especially if you're paying them, right, then you've got that dollar accountability. Right. You can tell other people, right? For me, oftentimes, if I'm going to do something, I'm going to tell somebody else so that I feel like an idiot, that someone else knows I didn't do what I said I was going to do. And I'm the win by noon guy and I'm supposed to do everything I said. That tends to work. And then I think the last thing is then again, you just have to be really strict around that's a commitment. And so the script I use is a pretty basic one, but it's just, I have a commitment at that time. So someone says, oh, hey, can you go to, lunch at 10 o'clock tomorrow, coffee at 10 o'clock on Thursday. And that's your video time. Just say, gosh, I've got a commitment at that time. Could we do it at 8:30, or can we do it at 1? Or, if it's a meeting that the person probably has some flexibility around, right? If it's the number one realtor in your market and they say, hey, can you do it at 10 o'clock? You should probably say, heck yeah, because you already have a block of time there. But that's when you got to remove it. But most of the time, you're not meeting with the number one agent in the market. You can just say to them, gosh, I got a commitment at that time. Hey, can we do that on Friday instead at 10? And I find that about 99% of the time, if you give them an alternate date, they'll say yes. Or you say, okay, how about any afternoon next week? They say yes. And every once in a while, you got to propose 2 or 3 things. And they say, nope, that's just what I got. And then you've got to decide, is this meeting more important than me recording the videos that I know are going to drive my business, that I told Ginger and Scott I'm going to record, that I told my team I'm going to record. And then you just have to choose to make that your non-negotiable, make your standard. And I think if you're prepared for it and you protect it, then you're infinitely more likely to do it than if you don't.
Yeah, and even if you do it once a month, so we have some of our clients that they record all their videos at one time.
Yep.
And that way it's done. They upload them. We have them all. They're good to go. And if you're using a calendar, like a Calendly or something like that, and you block it out in your calendar as busy, no one's going to hop in there unless you put them in there. And so going back to that non-negotiable you're talking about, it's like, just the same way that you hold, your team accountable to getting things done, you have to hold yourself accountable to them. So the recording video is one thing. And I think one of the things, and I know, Scott, we were kind of having a conversation before about social media and, being able to manage all of that. That's the secondary part of it, because, and I see that a lot. It's honestly why I created everything that we have, is just out of a need for people needing help, as far as not just with the doing the video, but the editing the video, the producing the video, and then going and posting the video. So there's really, when you're looking at, and this is why, you and I need to get together and geek out on this, because if you look at the whole scheduling thing, right, those are all different components that goes into creating an entire branding. I call it branding, because really your video is really about branding yourself and educating, as well as marketing. So how can they divide that up? And I love your color codes that you do with the Win by Noon. And you think about that. Is that helpful mentally to block out in certain things, to say, okay, Monday I'm going to have an hour, I'm going to develop my content. Tuesday I'm going to do this. Is that helpful?
I find that when people have have something that they do on a continual basis, like I love your idea of batching. Like if you can batch it all and do it, once a month, that's great. In fact, this guy, when he was all excited to tell me that he's got a very high profile loan officer, that he just took over 100% of her social media, and he was literally flying to her state today to record. His goal, they were going to try to record 50 videos in 3 hours. I'm like, holy smokes. Wow. Right? So that just tells you that she's scheduled time. She's been prepared. She probably bought your planner and is probably stealing all your ideas and using it.
That's why we wrote it.
Right. And so I think that's really key. But yeah, anytime that you've got something that's a target, a specific day, right? If you think about it, again, it's no different than, a lot of coaching programs. And in Win by Noon, I believe at target day activities, you call all your clients that are in process on Tuesdays, right? So again, if you've got a day where you do something, it becomes more of a habit. Again, people around you expect you to do it. If you've prepared for it, if you've, got the content ready, and you've got the cameras, like I've got all the lights were here set up. So I've been gone for 9 weeks. I come back, guess what? It's all still here. All I had to do was turn it on. It was still, ready to go. So I didn't have to set it up when I got there. So you kind of want to have everything be, set up and ready to go. And then really figure out how do I make it so I'm more likely. You got to kind of childproof yourself, right? For me, it's like the whole idea of having blinders on, like they put a blinder on a horse in the Kentucky Derby so they don't get distracted by the things that are around them, because they can see both sides. And, that's kind of how we all are. I'm like, people are like, oh, how's the bond market? People are always looking for an excuse not to pick up the phone call. They're looking for an excuse not to record a video. And so you have to block those other things out from you. And I just think if you pick a day of the week or a day of the month, like you said, like some of your clients do, I think that's genius, because again, then you've created an opportunity to be more efficient with it, right? Because again, this is when I'm going to do it. I don't have to think about it. And then you also become more consistent with it, because, hey, this is what I said I'm going to do. And when I said I'm going to do it. And that's why I find people who kind of do those, other people call them theme days. I call them target day activities. But when you say, okay, this is going to be it on the third Thursday of the month, I'm going to record all my video for next month. That's like amazing, right? But you're going to be more likely to do it once you've called that out. And especially if you're, obviously plugged into you, and you're going to hold them like, hey, where's your stuff? Like we got to get it done.
What I'm really liking in this conversation that's kind of sticking out to me is you're not only just planning to batch those videos, but I love the idea of batching the planning of those videos. So if you're going to record all your videos on one day every month, you probably have 2 or 3 other days that month that you're planning your topics and you're writing out your topics, because I know what happens. I got to do a video. Okay. I turn on my camera, get my microphone. Now, what am I going to do videos about? And I have to sit there and I have to come up with it. So I love the idea of kind of breaking it out and chunking it and maybe just taking, because you might know this, Todd, but like psychologically, how much time do we have before those ideas just start degrading? Like, you know what I'm saying? I mean, I can sit down for an hour and you can like have a solid conversation for an hour, but you realize you're mumbling after 90 minutes, if you're talking to somebody and it just starts to degrade. But like taking an hour when you're fresh and saying, okay, what are the 4 topics I want to look at? And maybe exploring those topics. And then maybe on a different day, you're taking those topics and you're researching them and you're getting all your bullet points for each one of those topics and you're getting them prepared so that when Saturday rolls around, you already have your bullet points, and so you're doing each of those things when you're kind of in a peak mindset or consciousness, I guess. Your mind is fresh because if you sit there and try to plan it out, bullet point it out and record it, you're exhausted. And you don't necessarily, you're not going to go back and do post-production at that point and then get them all put on the social calendar and then start promoting them and all that stuff. You really have to break up the whole process. And so that's kind of what I'm loving about this is you can say my 4 videos a week or a month, I'm going to record on one day, but I have these other couple of activities that I'll do throughout the week. And then it really just starts to, like you said, it starts to be a big rock, right? Because it's always there. You're going to always run into it every single time. It's like it's a non-negotiable, right? On Tuesday mornings or whatever, I research topics.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, right? And so, part of that, what you just said is, hey, I've got these ideas. And so most of you all run into ideas. They fall in your lap every day during the day. Yeah. And just like I said, hey, I was listening to this podcast and I heard this great thing from Stephen Pressfield, and that's fueled content for me this week. I did a podcast on it on Monday and spent 30 minutes talking about it. I probably could have talked about it for 3 hours. I'm so passionate about that topic. And so it's a whole idea of, as those ideas come to you, make sure that you've got somewhere to put it. So, I run, I don't overthink it. I just use the notes app in my iPhone, and it just has in there, video ideas in there. So that way it's ready to go as I have them. And then when I sit down, I've got it to go. But I do know some people like, nice. Perfect example of is I'm good friends and coached Josh Metal for a while. And, Josh has crushed it in business. And he was the first person that I talked to early on in content who said, oh yeah, Friday mornings I've got scheduled to work on the content. So before he ever went out there and recorded, he actually had committed to his team because they said the number one thing that they needed from him were more ideas and more content to be prepared. And so he blocked that time off just like you're talking about. And for me, I'm like all over the place. I'm like borderline ADD for real. And, a lot of loan officers I know are ADD. And so it's hard for me to sit anywhere for more than an hour. Like I was on a flight for 2 hours and they said I couldn't get my laptop, wouldn't log on the internet for some reason. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I'm like, Darren Hardy always says the dumbest thing you can do in an airplane is get on the internet. You actually have this time in this tube to actually think. And so I worked on ideas for an hour. And then lo and behold, my daughter was next to me. She's like, Dad, I'm on the internet. And I'm like, oh yay, I can get back on it. But you also have to understand yourself. And so for me, I can't sit there for 3 hours. In fact, I was talking to a realtor buddy of mine this morning. And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, I got to go. It's my 3-hour prospecting window. And this guy literally puts the headset on and he dials for 3 hours, every morning. Like that's his commitment to himself, to grow his business. And it's a habit that he makes and it's a non-negotiable. So if someone says, hey, can you show me a house tomorrow morning? He's like, I got a commitment at that time. And he shows them a house in the afternoon. If they say, hey, I'm going to set up my signing in the morning, he's like, I got a commitment. Can we do the signing in the afternoon? And again, you just have to have that really, I don't know if you call it pig-headed, focus on it, but you also have to know yourself. Like my wife could literally sit all day and work. I can't. I got to get up and walk around. I got to have those other things. And so think about how you can set yourself up, just like you said, Scott, of, hey, you know what? I'll work on my video for this amount of time, my ideas for this amount of time, and then allow yourself to get up and wander around, the office. I've had many coworkers over the years who hated me when I got my first wireless headset and I could wander the office while I'm talking.
Oh, you're one of those people.
And I'm super loud too. That's the worst part. I'm embarrassed to say it, but that's all right.
Well, and that's the thing, to your point of find what works for you, but then commit to it. So holding yourself accountable and not being able to walk away from it is so, so important. Scott, you talked a little bit about having that time to be able to come up with your ideas and your content. I really feel that that's an area where a lot of people struggle with that creativity
Mm.
and being able to tap into that. I love how you keep, your ideas in your notes. So it's always there. And that's the other thing is as you're coming up with different ideas, jot them down and look at trends. That's the other thing too, as far as what are the trends that are happening right now that you could talk about and being able to do a video about that. Scott, you always say, if you're looking for ideas for content, go to your inbox, right?
Yeah. Sent folder. Yep.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, think about the last 5 questions you had clients or realtors ask you and be thinking about how to answer those questions. One of the things I should say too, is that oftentimes I found for me when I was doing these kind of planning things is, we already talked about doing it first thing in the morning, but for me, it was on the way into the office. And then I would stop at a coffee shop and then I would hold myself captive from there, right? Don't get on the internet. Just have my notes with me. My wife would get mad. I used to zip my phone in my backpack because I thought, nothing's gonna blow up this early in the morning. I could spend, 30 minutes to an hour on my time on working on my business. And I was way more likely to get it done if I just did it first thing on the way to the office. I drop my daughter at school and do that versus trying to do it in the middle of the day. I mean, I can remember when, I had one of my coaches, I said, I just need to be held at an extreme level of accountability right now. And I committed to this project. And so of course, specificity matters. He's like, you got to get out of your office, Todd, because I know you're going to get interrupted and you're going to have all the excuses of being busy in your office. So he said, where are you going to be? And I committed to sit at this restaurant near my office. What time are you going to be there? I'm going to be there at 10 a.m. What day is that going to be? And let's call it Thursday. I don't remember what it was, but I'd already been in my office working. And I can remember that first time, like he had never called me my coach. Like the coaching company had to call in and talk to him. And I look at my phone and it's him calling me. I'm like, I'm on my way. But it was because on my calendar, it said I was supposed to be there. And I committed to do it. But that was a high level of it. But I would also just separate yourself sometimes. Because again, there's lots of things that can distract me here on my desk that will keep me from doing it. And so sometimes you have to think about, maybe I have to extract myself from it. And I think if you even do it before you get there, then you're less likely to get there, or more likely to get there, less likely not to leave.
I love that. Finding the environment.
Yeah, I love that idea of being conscientious of the environment where you're going to excel at whatever task you have to do. So if it's just thinking, you want to be in a thinking place. If you're making calls, you're going to be at your desk with your headset on, right? But if you just have to, if you're thinking about stuff, if you're working on your business, maybe get out, maybe schedule something at a coffee shop or a local business, or go to the public library, right? They still have those. Surround yourself with some good old fashioned books. And I think
Todd might be too loud for the library.
Oh, you know what? I did the library.
No, that's your thinking activities.
Yeah, I was, as an adult, I went back in I was in my early 30s. I went back and got my MBA. It's right before I got into becoming a loan officer. Ironically, I had this great idea. I was going to go back to school and be really smart. And so I'd have to study for exams. And I would literally drop my daughter off with my sister-in-law. I'd go to the coffee shop, work for a bit. And I'd go to this noodle bowl restaurant place. And I worked there until they wanted me to get out of there. And then I literally did go to the library, Scott, believe it or not, but it was super hard for me, but I would move around, right? I just couldn't sit in the one spot and actually do that. And, so you have to kind of know yourself. A friend of mine named Ben Hardy wrote a book called Willpower Doesn't Work. And, really, we all know it's obvious. Like, it's the easy example of that is that, if you're on a diet and you're trying not to eat sugar, then you got to, throw the candy out of the house, because having it sitting there in the cabinet is going to be too tempting for most people. And so oftentimes, I'll find people who are, nerdy like me, and they'll say, okay, when I do this, you mentioned like the thinking chair, Scott, like that's such a thinking time. Like I have a guy I met, he wrote a book called The Road Less Stupid, Keith Cunningham. And you can just Google him and listen to his podcast, but he talks about his thinking chair and his thinking time. And the story of it just blew me away, but he has a thinking chair, a thinking pen, and a thinking pad, and he sits in the same spot when he does his thinking, but that's all he uses it for. Like, wow, that's pretty smart. And then it reminds me going, well, I keep saying I'm gonna do thinking time, where literally you're not working on something, you're just thinking on a subject. And so again, I thought that was something great that you said. It reminded me of that, because again, think about how you can set yourself up for success. Because in the end, at least with me, I'm my own worst enemy. Like I said, I'm married to someone who's exactly the opposite of me when it comes to habits and all of that. And my wife's danger is literally she won't move during the day. She's like, I didn't get up to go to the bathroom. I didn't eat anything. I didn't drink anything. She'll just sit there and work. And I'm like, how can a human do that? Like, that's just crazy. And she's thinking the opposite. Like, you only sat there for 15 minutes. You're already up and you're already up and moving around. So you also have to know yourself and then set yourself up, because again, someone who's not wired like you may not get it either.
Yeah,
That's right.
absolutely.
Everybody's a little different.
Yeah. So we're at the top of the hour, and we always like to keep it right at 30 minutes, but I'd like to be able to share with our audience how they can find more information about you and some of the things that you do, Todd.
If you can just certainly follow me on social, just Todd Bookspan or Win by Noon. And, really you can go to winbynoon.com and check it all out. But, my commitment is always to help people figure out, reach their potential, whatever they believe it to be. And I feel like most people make it harder than it is. And it's kind of, I'll finish where I started. I think if you figure out what your priorities are, and one of them has to be video, and then you schedule those priorities, ideally before noon, before you get tired and distracted by everything else, or as Ginger says, your makeup gets bad, then I really truly believe you're more likely to get not just what you want accomplished done, but even more. And so I'm just grateful for the time to be here with the two of you.
Hey, we loved having
Thanks,
you.
Todd.
And, look forward to having you again.
All right. I can't wait. Okay,
awesome. So we'll see you all next week. Thanks for tuning in, and go make a video.
Thank you.
Bye.